Alrighty. Well, we are live. We are here in the swamp. Welcome, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about oyster mushrooms. I've got a little slideshow, a little presentation ready. Let me get that pulled up. Nothing crazy. We're not going to cover everything about all oysters. This isn't going to be the one all-inclusive oyster video, but I'm going to cover a few different things. A little bit about the history of some different oyster mushrooms, the whole Pleurotus genus. To kind of list off a few of my favorites. Some I've grown, some I'm looking forward to growing, and then a little bit about some cultivation tips on each and whatnot. And if anybody ever has any questions, feel free to ask them throughout. But let me share my presentation. Still figuring out all this StreamYard stuff. I could have it a lot smoother and nicer if I wanted to pay like $40 a month, but that seems ridiculous. So we're gonna stick with the free plan and get by and not personalize it too hard. But it gets it done. It gets the job done. Let's see. All right, pull that up. Process. You got it. Add to stage. There it is. Nice. All right. Can I get just that? You don't even have to look at me. That's nice. Let me know anytime, any questions, volume, anything, any issues, whatever it may be. But I'm Swamp Fox. You probably know me. But my name's Cole. I love growing mushrooms, and I want to get as many people possible growing connected to fungi in the natural world, mostly doing so through fungi. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about oyster mushrooms, or the Pleurotus genus as a whole, better known as just oyster mushrooms. We often cultivate what's in this picture in the top left and the top right, or the left and the top right, is an ostreatus, Pleurotus ostreatus. And then on the bottom right, that's a Pleurotus populinus that I found in the woods of Maine, in an old growth forest. Not related, but that was an incredible forest that they had. It was an old growth that apparently wasn't owned by anybody and was in private hands from like before the Revolutionary War, or like before the Civil War. And so during the Civil War, people would go up there, like generals would go up there to like clear their minds. And like, I guess there was a bunch of poets and stuff like that would over time spend time in those woods. And it was just a beautiful old growth forest in Western Maine. And that's where I found my wild Aspen oyster, populinus, right here on the bottom right. And then I also found some bear's heads in there. So it was just a really, really incredible forest that was 50 feet from my house. I really lucked out. But anywho, that's oysters. That's the introduction a little bit. Let's get into it. So the genus itself was early on just known as Agaricus ostreatus. So the Pleurotus came after. The ostreatus itself was just kind of known not just as one species, but seems like it was more of a general, these are all oysters, and it was Agaricus ostreatus. Seems like a lot of mushrooms were Agaricus early on. But 1871, Paul Kimmer, German mycologist, he came and established the Pleurotus genus. And it's also early in Germany, around like World War I, is where we see the boost and the boom of oyster cultivation. There was a lot of dead and dying trees and stumps and logs during World War I. And that's where a bunch of people became familiar with oyster mushrooms, with the Pleurotus ostreatus, I believe it was, growing everywhere because there was destruction all across because of the war. And so they had to rely on these oyster mushrooms to eat. And then after that, they just kind of became a staple and part of the food. And so the early cultivation really starts, I had it written down, I think, in my notes. Yeah, as early as 1917. is in Germany, is where the cultivation of the oyster mushrooms really started. So it was part of traditional Chinese medicine, and stuff like that, but it's not as well described and not as deep in their tradition as some of the other mushrooms like lion's mane, or like reishi mushrooms or things like that. The oysters were more, I think, of a big initial hit, and have a little bit more history with Germany, than China, as a lot of mushrooms. So the name itself, Pleurotus, comes from the word pleura, which means side, odo, which means ears, and so it's kind of just referring to the shape and size of the oyster mushrooms, of Pleurotus mushrooms, often looking kind of like a little the side of your ear, just especially if you see them growing in the wild. Like if you look here at the bottom picture, just single little shelves coming out, so you can see how, looking up underneath the bottom right mushrooms, how it got the name side ear, Pleurotus. So there's around 203 different species of Pleurotus currently. That's probably going to continue to grow, as with all mushroom species and our knowledge of them, year by year, day by day, minute by minute, really. So there's about 203 currently, and most commonly we're working with things like ostreatus, pulmonarius, the Jamor, that's kind of a weird one for me to say. Citrian, it's not written down right in front of me, but the Citrianopla, the yellow oyster. So we've got like blue oysters, phoenix oysters, pink oysters, yellow oysters, all sorts of them. And they're all saprophytic, but oftentimes you'll see with oysters. And so saprophytic means that they decompose and break down dead material. But oftentimes with oysters, some things like with the yellow oysters, sometimes with ostreatus, and some other species of oysters, you'll see them become opportunistically parasitic. So kind of right as that tree is on its way out and it's not looking really good for that tree, and as soon as it dies, or is like coming really probably not gonna make it, that oyster mushroom is ready to pounce on it and break everything down, and establish itself. So that's part of how they're aggressive, extremely aggressive in cultivation. But even in nature, you can see they're some of the earliest colonizers, and just ready to go, which is why we love them in cultivation. So if you're not cultivating them, you look outside, you can almost find oyster mushrooms almost everywhere. Obviously, you see there's some bare spots, where it's a little bit more barren, a little too cold, a little too dry. But just as the Pleurotus genus, this is a map screenshot of all the iNaturalist observations. So it's not even all of them. There's obviously more, and there's more we're going to discover. But you can see, especially in the US, we use iNaturalist a lot, hopefully more and more. If you're not using it, iNaturalist is a great identification app. So when you're out and about in the wild, you can take pictures of mushrooms, plants, animals, bugs, take a good pictures of them, top, bottom, habitat, any descriptive notes, and you can put in a location that tells you who, what, where it is. Not always correct, but you can see this is all the locations that Pleurotus mushrooms first came in. And so originally it seems like they originated in Asia. But again, like I was just saying a few minutes ago, their first cultivation was really in early 1900s in Germany. And that was looking really kind of like how early shiitake cultivation was. And that was just kind of placing fresh stumps, fresh logs, fresh wood and things, substrates that they found them growing on, and just putting those things near the currently fruiting logs. And so they would just kind of have the fruiting logs that are dispersing their spores, and nearby they've got their next round of logs or the next stumps or whatever it may be. So then they can kind of have it almost as like a mother culture spreading to those other logs, and then they're able to kind of expand as those continue to colonize. Way less efficient than we do it now, but that's fine. So diversity, oyster mushrooms, I didn't look up how many they have species wise compared to other species, But when it comes to, or other genus, but the amount is, there's 203 species of oyster mushrooms, and in terms of cultivation, there's, I don't think, a mushroom that we have more of their species in rotation. Ganoderma is getting there because a lot of them, there's more and more Ganodermas I'm seeing people cultivate. Hericiums, we've only got a few Hericiums people are cultivating. Boletes, we're not really cultivating. There's a bunch of other limits. Enoki, really, we're just button mushrooms, the same mushroom. So there's really no other mushroom in cultivation that we have this much diversity with. And that's in terms of species, right? And so the ostreatus, the jamor, pulmonarius, citronopiliatus. I'm really good at these scientific names. You can tell how often I actually say them out loud, and it's not often. Eringi, which is the king oyster, and like that's really just our main cultivators. Not all of them. And so even within the ostreatus, you'll see we've got like the tree oyster, pearl oyster, regular old oyster, blues, all the variations off the blues. If you look at like Mossy Creek, he's got, I don't know, at least 10 blue oysters, right? And they're all a little bit different. They've got different colors, different growth patterns. Snow oysters, same things. The Florida oyster, that might be a variant of ostreatus. Some people think it might be its own thing. But really, it seems that in literature, it's able to crossbreed with other ostreatus strains, so other blues, other snows, things like that. And so that would mean that it would be one species. And so I actually have the Florida oyster and a bunch of blue oysters. So I'll be testing that species interbreeding capabilities here shortly. But first, we'll get into the plain old ostreatus, the tree oyster, the snows, the blues, the pearls, the Florida oysters. These were all offsprings and cultivars and really just different isolations off of this same one species of ostreatus. They're all able to interbreed and work with each other. The spores are compatible, but the ostreatus is probably the most popular in cultivation. It's all of what we're used to as blue oysters for the most part. And so these oysters, they're super resilient, super adaptable. It's really cool, actually. I've got it right there on the slide. And so they attack and kill nematodes, kind of in some different ways, actually. So it's the mycelium of the ostreatus creates like a net that a bunch of different nematodes get stuck in, both good and bad. So it's not like it's just killing the bad nematodes, but it's really helpful where I am in Florida because we've got a nematode problem, some different nematodes that come for the roots of plants. And so being able to use the oyster mushrooms and spent mushroom substrates with oyster mushrooms, the mycelium, both dead and alive, can trap the nematodes just in its inner webbing. But also when it's alive, it's able to reach out, expand, and grab a hold, kind of hunt nematodes, which is cool. And then it also has the ostreatus. I think most oysters have that kind of netting capability with their mycelium, but then some species like this one also produce like a nemacidal compounds, and so you can use the enzymes kind of like make an oyster tea with your oyster block if you want to rehydrate it, and a bunch of the enzymes and the compounds are going to leach out into the water there, kind of have some anti-nemicide compounds and such in there. It's interesting and probably going to be very helpful, I think, in the gardens and in like places that are currently struggling and trying to revamp their ecosystem, and have like a bunch of problems and just no life in their soils, nothing to kind of balance things out. And so that's when you'll get a bunch of more negative things to move in. So that's got a bunch of potential. I won't go too deep into that. That'll be an episode all in its own. Just oysters as spent mushroom substrates, or just oysters and their nemicide or their nematode hunting abilities. But ostreatus, it's the archetypal oyster. It's the one we all know and love, prolific fruiter. It's similar to pulmonarius in a lot of ways, but it's going to be a lot denser. And the pulmonarius is the phoenix oyster, but The ostreatus is going to be a denser, more meaty oyster. It's able to handle a wide range of temperatures, again, especially depending on if you're going for the snows, the snow oysters, or the Florida oysters. While it's the same species, the snow oysters are able to grow and prefer to be under 60 degrees and in those colder, cooler temperatures, versus the Florida oysters, I'm sure would fruit in those cooler conditions as well. But I've had a lot of luck growing the Florida oysters out here in Florida, which makes sense, it's in the name. But it's been um, mid 95 degrees and really low humidity. So the Florida oysters are definitely different than the snows, but it's interesting. Let's see. Yeah, so I don't know if it matters if it's hot or cold. I'd say go more cold, just because most times your cold is better because it's going to be slower, and you're going to kind of help save some different compounds that are maybe heat sensitive. But yeah, the for my spent mushroom blocks, or whenever I'm between flushes, I'll put uh I'll put the blocks in a bucket or in a bin with some water to be able to rehydrate them, especially if it's been really, really dry. Sometimes they're fine without hydrating it, but I'm able to then take that liquid, that water, that will get a little tint, and that's all the enzymes and everything, and a bunch of the compounds out of the mushroom substrate are often super water soluble. Not all of them, but especially for that, it produces the ostreatus produces the nemecidal compounds, so that'll come right out into the tea, into the water as you're rehydrating some blocks, and then you can use that in the garden, especially if you're having nematode issues. And it could have been it could have been a bunch of different things. If there you had a bunch of different flying little bugs, because that's that's one of the big negatives with oysters. Actually, is that lion's mane has some different smells to it. Reishi has some different smells to it, but oysters have like a bunch of different kind of volatile, just like scent compounds that draw in more bugs, more ants, flies, little tiny little flyers that I have no idea what they even are. I need to study up on my bugs, but it's possible it could have been a bunch of different things. And the nematodes I know usually are more soil bound and water bound and stuff. So it could have been a bunch of different things, but I know oysters, that's one of the big negative of oysters, especially things like some pink oysters and things, because they can have such strong smells and pheromones that they're, or not pheromones, but scents, and it just draws in so many different insects. So yeah, it could have been definitely a handful of different things, but that's the downfall of oysters, is they're delicious to us, but they're also delicious to a bunch of other species of insects. So they'll move in and find it. But well, yeah, actually, and then it's possible that it's also dependent on the species. I haven't looked too much into the exact species and things like that, but I know that it's got potential good and bad to be able to wipe out a bunch of nematodes. So it's also possible it was a different species, or maybe some of the more cultivated, isolated ostreatus varieties kind of lose some of those tendencies compared to some of the wild varieties. I think that could be something that's interesting to compare, being able to look at some of the species that have been heavily cultivated or heavily bred indoors, and how they lose some of those abilities, some of the compounds, some of the different enzymes, compared to some of the different wild varieties, or more wild varieties at least. Um, so yeah, that's something we'll dive into. We'll do a live, and we'll at least a video, maybe not a live, but at least a video or something coming up. We'll dive more into some of the nematodes and things, and some of that, so that we can get a better idea of it. But that's a whole rabbit hole, so we'll get there. But let's see. So ostreatus, I've got a bunch of notes on a notepad, but again, my handwriting's terrible, and I've I've covered most of the basic things. We can talk a little bit about some of the substrates later. And I've got a recipe I didn't actually put in, but I can write that down at the end. But it's also interesting, actually. Ostreatus oyster mushrooms, most oysters, a bunch of the different Pleurotus can grow on coffee waste and be able to utilize the coffee grounds. And it was even found that the Ostreatus variety, I think better than some of the others, was able to like heavily reduce up to 90% of the caffeine in the coffee waste. So then you were able to use the spent mushroom substrate that utilized coffee as an animal feed. And then you're not going to get your pigs all jacked up on, or cows or chickens all jacked up on caffeine. The oyster mushrooms are able to kind of use the coffee waste and reduce the caffeine, most of the residual caffeine. I think specifically for the Ostreatus for this study, but I don't think that maybe that means it's only the Ostreatus. Next, we'll talk a little bit about pink oysters. So this pink oysters, I actually recently just got this culture fruited for the first time actually, I don't know if this specific culture was, I think, the first time I fruited the culture. But I had a different pink oyster culture I had for a few years. And I ran that. One of the first mushrooms I fruited was a pink oyster. And then I just dove in and got all sorts of other lion's manes and oysters and rishis and all sorts of fungus. And the pink oysters, they're delicious, but they spoil really fast. They're like a little picky on color, on like the lighting and stuff. Then like I had a bad tent, and so I got like some gray pink oyster mushrooms because my lighting was too dim. I didn't have the proper lighting to get those vibrant colors. And then with the fast spoilage, I was just like, I'm kind of done with oyster mushrooms. And I was up in Maine. It was really cold. I didn't really need the heat variety. But now I had this culture, PD1 from Maiden Cap and Stem, PD Pleurotus Jamor to Jamor. That's a lot of my names, culture names are just a little abbreviation of the species, genus, and the nickname for the culture. But the pink oyster, really good, originates from the tropical regions. You'll find this one or the Salmino straminius, however you say that. It's the other pink oyster variety. I believe that one is a little bit more pink, maybe, as it ages, and a little bit less temperature, cold sensitive. But these species, the pink oysters, you'll find growing up to 95 degrees. They're really, really fast. Usually about 2 weeks after you put grain the substrate, you've got fruits, or pretty close to. Depends on the ratio, depends on the temperatures and things like that. But the pink oysters might be the fastest oysters. My Florida oyster has been keeping up with the pinks. Actually, it fruited the day before the pinks finished, but pinks are pretty consistently really, really fast. They also spoil almost as fast, and that's the downside. Everyone knows that there's, or maybe you don't know, but many of the growers of pink oysters don't like to grow them because they can tend to have a little smell to them, where they smell just like a little bit like fishy, dirty lady parts. And so that really only comes as the oysters age, as they're super fresh, right? Time to eat it, time to harvest. You're not really going to get too much of a smell. Yes, unfortunately, we in America don't follow the same temperature or any sort of measurement as anywhere else in the world. So I'll be talking mostly in Fahrenheit and feet and inches and pounds and things that don't make sense to anybody else other than me, because America, we're ridiculous over here. I got to work on my conversions, but yes, so that's how I can grow pink oysters up to 95 degrees, 35 degrees Celsius. And maybe they're not going to be as consistent as some commercial varieties and things, or commercial conditions up at that 95 degrees. But but they're at least capable of doing it. And a lot of times, if you see people growing mushrooms in the middle of summer in their garden beds, using straw or different things in their garden beds, you'll see a lot of people running pink oysters because they are able to take the heat. They can take a little bit more sun, and a little bit more sun just kind of helps develop a little bit more color. Obviously, also the heat, if it's too hot, they'll get a little bit more gray. Colder conditions can help kind of get a more vibrant color like any oyster. But still, they're really resilient. They're able to kind of take these hard conditions, 95 degrees and no added humidity, real dry. So impressive. They taste like bacon also if you cook them up. I just made actually a bunch of mushroom jerky out of the pink oysters, the lion's mane, and the Florida oysters I just harvested. I marinated them for a couple hours and smoked them for a couple hours, and then put them in the dehydrator. And the pinks came out really good. I split them. I wasn't thinking. I went a little too thin, and I took the big petals and I ripped them in half because I was like, I don't want all that. And I should have left the big meatier pieces. And I think it would have dried a little bit better. It's like almost I dried it a little too much, but I don't know. First mushroom jerky, the pink oysters were pretty delicious for it. And so, like I was saying, cooler conditions, brighter lights, you can get a little bit more color. But these things are able to grow on anything from just hardwood to straw to pasteurized, sterilized. It doesn't really matter. It's aggressive enough, especially if you do a little bit lower supplementation. It can handle pasteurized substrates easily. Most oysters can. That's the benefit of oysters, is we can get away with a bunch of pasteurization, a bunch of low-tech techniques, and then the oysters are aggressive enough that they're able to make up for any of our mistakes, or any of the non-sterile conditions, because they just want to grow in fruit. So pink oysters, they're super bright. They're really cool. If you're at farmers markets, pink oysters and gold oysters are almost necessary, at least to have a couple, just because you can have little SpongeBob and Patrick colored mushrooms sitting at the edge of your table, draw everybody in. And what pasteurization ratios? I don't know what you mean by ratios, but for pasteurization, so for the oysters, for the straw, if it's for how much supplementation, usually it's anything under 20%. I can get away with, once I hit 20%, it's too sketchy unless I'm using heavy spawn and the oysters. But like more like, yeah. So if I'm doing just sawdust, obviously that's easy just to pasteurize. Even if you just do hardwood fuel pellets or barbecue pellets, you can almost get away with just doing a little bit of boiling water. But as soon as you start adding any supplementation to your substrate, that's when you have to think about going away from a pasteurization or into a true pasteurization, or then further into a sterilization. And usually oysters are definitely, you're able to get away with more with the oysters compared to things like lion's mane, or enoki, or things like that, or freckled chestnuts. But for oysters, it's still, I'd say probably once you get to about 15% supplementation or under, I'd say definitely you can do some pasteurization. And so not even necessarily ultra pasteurization. If you're going to use the substrate fast, again, pasteurization, you're not going to be killing everything. You're leaving some possible microbes and things in the substrate. So you want to use it within about 2 weeks if you're going to pasteurize. If you're going to have a heavier supplemented substrate that you pasteurize, maybe closer to use it within 10 days. But oyster mushrooms, specifically Pleurotus, ostreatus, or the pink oyster. The yellow oyster I haven't grown as much myself, but it's super aggressive, so you could probably do it with that. Most oysters, other than kind of some of the weird ones, you could definitely do up to probably 20% supplementation, hit a pasteurization, which is really just hitting 170, 180 degrees inside those block temps. Really, I think it's 170, 165 is really all it technically is, but I usually go 170, 180 at least. which I guess is getting closer into that ultra pasteurization. But even then, for especially for oysters, and about 20% supplementation, you can probably pasteurize those for a handful of hours. The 4 or 5 hour mark, I'll hold them at that temperature of 170, and then the oysters, as long as I use those blocks within 2 weeks, the oysters are even longer, but 2 weeks is always safe. But that's why the oysters are great, is because you can do that or do just with straw. You can use just straw and lime pasteurize, and so you can do a bunch of different things. And obviously, you want to use some supplementation sometimes, especially for some commercial cultivation, because then you're able to boost and get higher substrates or higher yields out of your substrate. Whenever you put a little bit of supplementation in there, and that's what's nice about the oysters. Almost all oyster varieties is, yeah, you can go probably up to 20%, and hold that pasteurization of about 170 degrees for 4 or 5 hours, and that's worked really, really, really good for me. Even going outdoors into the 95 degrees, where things get pretty hot. So, yeah, and brand supplementation, I love the wheat brand. Soy hull pellets, they do great with the Masters mix as well. But yeah, the brand supplementation is great. I love it because I can pick it up at Walmart or Publix or Hannaford or whatever grocery store. So yeah, I love the wheat brand. And I agree, the oysters and the lion's mane, love it. Over 20%, things will start to get weird, or can get weird, especially depending on how much grain you're adding. But 15-20%, I like to sterilize because I'm at a smaller scale, and it just helps me sit on blocks. But certain species do prefer pasteurization, like wine caps, which aren't an oyster. But yeah, I usually do 15-20%. Usually brand, but I've been running some Masters mix just because I wanted to try it out for a little while. So yeah, 15-20% brand. That's a primo ratio to kind of reach for. Most things are gonna love that. Phoenix oysters, they're gonna love it. It's Pleurotus and pulmonarius. They're the Phoenix oyster, Italian oyster. They're nice. I've got a couple better. The better flushes I've had have gotten attacked by fungus gnats, and then those will get a little blotchy. And so that was like with the oysters, bringing in some different things. Whenever I mix up a couple little like essential oil IPM sprays, like for plants, like some Lost Coast plant therapy, those type of things. Mixing up a little bit of those types of sprays and spraying around my tent, so it just smells clean. Not spraying the blocks, but like the outside of my tent, and the floor. So that way it just smells not like oysters, and maybe smells a little cleaner, more like some different kind of oils and things that are going to help drive away some things. And I haven't had as much blotch, and I haven't had as much issues with flies just all over my oysters. So maybe it's working. But the Phoenix oyster, it's lovely. It works really well in the heat. It's a common thing that people are going to run this time of year in the summer. But it's not quite as gourmet as pink oysters have a look better taste. So they're still pretty gourmet, but that smell kind of, they spoil fast, but they're still really nice. But the pink oysters themselves also are going to be a little fragile. The Phoenix oysters also, they're going to be fragile in a different way, but still fragile. And so the edges of the gills, or the edges of the caps, and the gills, are just really fragile on the Phoenix oyster, especially compared to some of the other oyster varieties. They look quite a bit like the ostreatus, the different blues and such, but they just don't store as well. They don't travel as well. But they're really fast. They fruit fast. They're really fast, aggressive colonizers. They can grow in a bunch of different things. They're a little bit more tolerant of some conifers and some softwoods than some of the other oysters, but they just they don't store and pack and travel quite as well, because they're just not as hardy, not as durable as some of the other oysters. But sometimes it's the conditions, they set you up for it, and you need these fast, warmer growing oysters. So it's still a lovely variety to work with. But And it's one of the more adaptive ones. It's one that I've seen people growing these on a pair of jeans, and so it's one that can kind of grow on whatever it wants. Usually in the wild too, you'll see it at some higher elevations. And yeah, so grow temps ideally for a lot of oysters, for a lot of mushrooms, your ideal, air quotes, ideal air temperature is going to be closer to probably 60 or 55. Some of the oysters probably like 55, but some of these, the Phoenix oyster ideal is probably more like 70 or 75 for commercial, like real true commercial, trying to push everything to the max. But what I'm finding is that, or at least that's what everyone's been told and as stated. Let's see, did I write down what I took a lot of these notes? Yeah. So Paul Stamets says ideal for Phoenix oyster, 65 to 75 degrees. But really, they can handle way more than 75. That's just like the ideal range. But even ostreatus, I think he said 60 to 70 degrees, which I've got the Florida oyster out there. But I didn't weigh it, but I was easily a pound the cluster off of a 5-pound block in 95 degrees. So the good temperatures are definitely different than the ideal temperatures. And so for the Phoenix, for the pinks, for some of the different varieties like the Florida oyster and such, you can definitely push it up into 85, 95. If you can, I definitely feel better about 85 degrees than 95 degrees. I'd feel better about 80 degrees. But I'm growing outdoors in just a little shade cloth on the side of a garage. And so I can't really keep it cool. Maybe you're doing something similar. Maybe other people are doing something similar. And so that's why I want to be able to see and show how adaptable and what some of these varieties can do. And so if I was trying to grow for production, more production, I would probably try and keep it definitely more towards 85, definitely more towards 75. Really, if you can, the cooler, the better. Cooler temperatures are going to be better for thicker, denser, meatier textures and oysters. It's going to help you get a little richer, deeper color. And then the cooler temperatures are also just going to help keep some different contaminants and bacteria and different competitors away compared to the mycelium and the oysters that we're trying to cultivate. And yeah. So definitely, that's what I'm finding is that they're definitely variable. They can take the range, and so depending on what season you're into, you can use different species to kind of match. If you're sitting a little bit closer to the 73 degrees, or maybe it's warmer in a couple weeks, so you're pushing those 96 degrees. That's when you're going to be running your pink oysters or your Florida oysters or your Phoenix oysters that are proven in those higher, warmer conditions. And then once you get to those cooler temps, you're still probably not I wouldn't run something like this, the king oyster. I don't have the culture even. I lost it in travels and moving, unfortunately. But like the king oyster wants cooler conditions, but the ostreatus varieties, most of them, blue oysters, like I've got a POCNS, that can't quite handle the 90s quite as much as some of the others, but the Florida oyster is loving it and does really, really well. And then like I've got it's a different one. It's a lion's mane, but like a June cut lion's mane has been able to produce pretty well and pretty consistently in that mid 90 range. So it's ideally, right, we want to keep it consistent and a little bit cooler. But yeah, you're able to do a bunch of different things with a bunch of different varieties. So for recommendation for the pink oyster, ideally, I'd probably shoot for like 70, 75. Probably 75 for the pink oyster, just to help get it some of this. I mean, you can go cooler. I think it wants it probably more. Under 60 and pink oyster is not going to do anything. It doesn't really like the cool or the cold. So the pink oyster, I'd say go, especially closer to that 73. But whenever you're in the 90s, like this is the weird balance of growing mushrooms, is that sometimes there's some people that are in massive facilities and are pushing every variety to its limits basically and getting the most of everything. And so that's when you want to shoot for those cooler conditions. That's when the pink oyster, ideally, if I was running at scale, I'd probably try and keep it more towards 70 to 75. But it can handle up to 90, 95, 96 degrees. And so it's one of the varieties during those hot weather conditions. I would definitely lean towards the pink oysters and the Florida oysters. The Florida oyster has done really good. Hasn't dried out, like hasn't gotten blotched like a bunch of other oysters when it gets that hot in the mid 90s. And so it's able to take it. But ideally, I would probably keep it more towards like under 80, ideally. But it's, we're playing a balance game. And so it's able to take a bunch of different ranges. So whenever you're in those 70 degrees, maybe you go for some different blue oysters. They're a little thicker, denser. But then once it starts to get into like the 80s, the 90s for temperature, that's when you switch to the pink oysters or the Florida oyster or the Phoenix oyster, different oysters that show that they're able to take it. Each variety, each culture is definitely different in their abilities. And at 95, you're probably going to 95 degrees, you're going to get a little bit lower, 36 degrees Celsius. Sorry, I haven't even been considering it, but 36 degrees Celsius, you're going to get a lower yield, but a faster fruiting and a faster turnaround. But maybe, it's the color's a little different than compared to 23 degrees Celsius. So you're picking and choosing hairs, and you kind of got to go back and forth. But what's important is that they are flexible, and you can take it whatever your conditions are and find the oyster that works for them. And so FAE, pink oysters do want quite a bit, but they're definitely not going to be as affected as some of the other oysters. Blue oysters specifically aren't going to fruit if you have too high CO2. They're just not going to do it. But pink oysters and some of the Phoenix and some king oysters, they prefer higher CO2. So time-wise, humidity-wise, it depends. Constant ventilation is kind of what I had my old tent at, actually. In a few years ago, I had a grow tent and my lab and incubation and everything in just one single room. And I had a tent that was usually on pretty constant exhaust running pretty constantly out the window. And I was having trouble with fruiting oysters. And I'm like, just starting out really like pretty early in cultivation. I'm like, God, I'm growing great lion's mane, growing great chestnuts, but like here I am trying to grow blue oysters, the things that everybody starts with, and I can't fruit them. Like, what is happening? And then finally I put the blue oyster block outside, and it blew up. It did great. And then I took a different variety, I don't remember which, but a different oyster variety, and put it in my tent, and it took off and it fruited and it was fine. And so pink oysters aren't as picky, but blue oysters, if you have too much CO2, blue oysters like won't fruit. But then king oysters, they're going to want the higher CO2 because you're developing those stems. You're getting those thick, meaty stems, and the stems of a mushroom. Why some oysters get super, super stemmy and lanky is because they're just searching for air. So the king oyster is the only mushroom you want to keep searching for air, and you want the stems because the stems are the good, dense, meaty parts. Black Pearl Kings, unfortunately, I haven't grown them. I haven't grown the Black Pearl Kings or the king oysters. I'm slacking on a bunch of oysters, truly. I had the cultures, and then through moving and such, I had attempted to fruit the king oysters just once, and then I didn't end up fruiting for me, and then I just got lost in a bunch of other cultures, and now I don't have it. So I have to still try the Black Pearl King and do another run of the king oyster. But actually, I think my king oyster, I might have one from main cap and stem. I think it's like PE Kong, I think I have that in a cold storage for main cap and stem. But my other king oyster that I tried fruiting, I just went to the store and bought some king oysters, and there were some Musam Valley mushrooms, a Maine producer of mushrooms up in the state of Maine, and cloned one of those oysters. And so that's how I started running my oysters, or my king oysters, just to clone off the grocery store. And then Lion's mane, yellow oyster, same tent. Yep. I'd say recommendations to run at the same time. It depends on your setup. It depends on your space. Most oysters do pretty well together. I haven't had too many issues with oysters, especially different like blue oysters in conjunction with some different like I just had a lion's mane, a pink oyster, and the Florida oyster all fruiting right next to each other. Um, and it depends on the species, it depends on the exact culture for some of the different conditions. But if you're sitting there at some of the warmer conditions, some of the higher temperatures in your tent, then yeah, I'd run towards maybe some of the pinks to go with there in there, or some like the Florida oyster or Phoenix oyster, some of the more warm weather oysters. And as long as you have the right ratio of blocks in there, maybe obviously too many blocks, you're going to start to build up CO2. Um, but if you're having success with lion's mane and yellow oyster together, yellow oysters is pretty aggressive and sporulates pretty hard. So that one is, I think, more one of them that if a lion's mane's and if they're fruiting with the lion's mane, then everything else should be pretty mint. The lion's mane is going to be pickier than any of the oysters, really. Though it can come down to then pink oysters, I think, are going to be less CO2 sensitive than some of the oysters. So if you're maybe the lion's mane does take and handle some higher CO2 than some of the oysters. So depending on how dense some of your yellow oysters right now are, and how your CO2 and air levels are, you might want to go more towards pinks or something, or maybe even the Phoenix oysters, than some of the different blue oysters that can get a little bit leggy. But yeah, the king oysters is one of the mushrooms you want to get leggy. They're one of the most delectable, meaty, dense, choice, delicious mushrooms. People love these things. A bunch of different people have told me that this is the best tasting mushroom. A bunch of different people online talk about it. People love their king oysters, and it's one of the different oysters to grow. So most other oysters, you want to take the block, the 5-pound block, the log, whatever, the bag, whatever you're doing, and you'll cut like an X in the side of the bag or a triangle. I like the X. And so what the X in the side of the bag does is create a bunch of disrupts the surface area a little bit, provides some fresh air. And then the flaps from the X, the little triangles that stay flat on the block, keep the surface moist. But king oysters, you don't do an X. You just slice the top of the block and leave like a couple inch collar. So then that can help build up some CO2. And then you use your fingers or a fork or something to kind of scrape up the surface and disrupt the surface. Some people like to do a casing layer, and you can. It's not super necessary, but they're different. They top fruit. They want higher CO2s. It's the only oyster you want to give CO2 to, and just get those big, dense stems. Because the stems are just delicious. And it's one of the perks of these growing king oysters, especially in higher numbers compared to growing higher numbers of other oysters, is it's going to be a way lower spore count. So oysters are known, I've got a slide later, but if you're harvesting and working with a lot of oysters, ventilate the air and wear a mask. There's a bunch of people, there's spore lung, it's a thing, look it up. People become allergic to mushroom spores, especially the spores of oysters, because they produce such heavy spores that they get into your lungs and make it terrible. But king oysters, tiny gills, not as heavy sporulators. So that's another perk to them being delicious and meaty. But they're going to want higher CO2 levels compared to some of the different other oyster mushrooms. And they're going to want slightly cooler conditions. They're not quite as resilient. They're not gonna colonize quite as much anything, but they can still work on straw. It's been done on straw, but does best on a good supplemented hardwood. Takes about 3 weeks after incubation or after colonize or after you start to inoculate. That's the word. But yeah, it's a great gourmet, but it's not quite as adaptable as some of the other oysters, but it's probably the most gourmet tasting mushroom of any of the oysters. It's also great because unlike the phoenix and the pink oyster, this one has the best shelf life and the best shippability. It's really easy to harvest and pack away in different containers and travel with, and it's not going to get squished and messed up, and the gills aren't going to fall apart, and the things aren't going to break. It's just dense, meaty, compact. It's a great mushroom for cultivators. You can charge a little bit more for it just because of how delicious it is, and it's going to work for you in terms of storage and shelf life. Yeah, so I would say for your pink oyster, I'd say take it out of the fridge. And most pink oysters, some people have said that they it's depends on the species and the cultivar itself, or not the species but the cultivar itself. um so I would say for pink oysters, yeah, I would say to store it outside of the fridge. I had my pink oyster culture in a water vial in an outdoor storage unit up in Maine in the winter months. So I assume it like pretty much froze in there. Like it gets pretty cold. It wasn't like deep, deep winter, but it was October through January in Maine. And so there was snow on the ground. It was pretty cold, and I went and unpacked it, and then it traveled in the back of a trailer for a couple days in Maine, and then came back down to Florida. So it was pretty cold, like, and it was fine. I just fruited that after pulling it out of the water vial. So I'd say don't store your pink oyster in the fridge. Pink oysters are one of the more temperature sensitive ones. They don't like it cold, especially if it gets near freezing. Um, but I wouldn't freak out. It should be fine, especially if it hasn't been in there forever. And depending on how cold it is. But they're pretty resilient. But yeah, don't store your pink oysters in the fridge. They prefer more room temperatures, warmer temperatures. But what exact temperatures, it depends, because mushrooms continue to be more resilient than we think they are. And yeah, mushroom worker lung, spore lung, it's yeah, it's very real. I know Mossy Creek, he talks about it a lot in some of his videos. And he's got a good cough, and you'll be able to tell on some of his older videos too. He'll walk around some oysters and be in the grow room, and he'll just start coughing and hacking and get all worked up. And there's plenty of other people that don't have exact videos of it, but spore lung is real. So yeah, ventilate. If you're growing indoors, I have one. I need to look under the microscope. I just woke it up from water vials, but there's sporeless oyster varieties. Some of them are more sporeless. Some of them hold on to the spores. Some of them don't produce spores. Some of them produce less spores. But this is why sporeless varieties are super interesting, because oysters are terrible in terms of their spore production. Can be kind of parasitic towards us even. And so not them. I mean, I don't think they're going to take over and eat us from our lungs out. But I mean, enough spores and one of them might germinate, right? Shit. Uh, but on top of that, and how much spores they produce, we've got yellow gold oyster, Pleurotus citronopiliatus, rolls right off the tongue. No, it's not one of the worst ones. But it's, I guess, got a little citrusy aroma to it. I've grown this one a few times early on, but then I liked it and I liked the color, but it just wasn't meaty enough and dense enough for me, so I didn't love it. It's got like that thin little stem you can even see in those pictures right at the base of it. But it's great. It's the yellow oyster is super adaptive. It can grow on damn near anything. It's a really fast fruiter. It's really aggressive. It can grow in warmer temperatures, and all of those kind of make it so it's also debatably a little invasive, depending on who you ask. Maybe it's not invasive. Maybe it's just filling a role that needs to be filled. Maybe it's taking the role of other mushrooms that could be there, breaking it down. But there's more and more yellow oysters or gold oysters. Same. Just depends who you talk to, and they'll say yellow or gold. Depends what day you ask me, and I'll say yellow or gold. But they're more and more being found. They were exclusively to Asia But now we're seeing more and more. Honestly, I love the smell of a latex glove. So I gotta grow some yellow oysters so I can compare it to a nice latex, like a good glove smell. Not like every glove, but like, yeah. But yeah, and also anise. I gotta get some anise seed. I think I know what it smells like. But I just know that oysters smell like anise. But then I do love looking in like the Paul Stamets book, Growing Gourmet and Medicinal Mushrooms, and a lot of the oyster varieties and the mycelium and the smells and scents. It just says oyster-esque because it's like there's no good way to put some of these smells, but they all smell oystery. And once you get and grow and smell oyster mushrooms and the mycelium, and somebody says, it smells like oysters, I can smell what genus it is, and it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense if you don't know it. So yeah, honestly, I used to work in medical cannabis, and my favorite thing was the smells. Some of the plants like papaya. People love papaya. It's a plant known for its flavor, smells or tastes like fresh fruit papaya. The rosin from this plant. I would just go into the room and just rub my fingers and just smell my fingers nonstop, because something about different smells and aromas just trigger different things in my brain and get me so excited. So like the smell of sweet oyster mushrooms, the populinus, the Aspen oyster I have smells so like anise oystery, almost a little black licoricey, but also like super flowery and freight. I love the smells. Smells get me so excited. So thank you for that. I now have to grow yellow oysters so I can smell the latex gloves. But yeah, so yellow oysters, debatably invasive because oysters produce a lot of spores, and a lot of mushroom growers, they were originally just in Asia, and now people are seeing them in woods behind mushroom grows in Pennsylvania woods, in this place and that place. And maybe part of it is that they're just spreading a little bit on their own, and we were never looking for them until oyster mushroom cultivation started in like the 1970s. So, maybe we weren't really looking for yellow oysters until recently, and that's why we're thinking they're invasive now. Or maybe they are invasive and they're taking a bunch of these roles and spaces that a bunch of different oysters and native oysters or lion's manes or this or that or whatever, enoki's and other things could eventually take up, and now just being oyster mushrooms. Like I was saying, I don't really like they got those little tiny stems. They're just like a lighter yielding oyster, but they're resilient and adaptive. So if you need to be able to produce in some warmer, kind of more poor conditions, then the yellow oyster is a great one because it's able to handle and grow just about anywhere. And it's great to put and pair right next to your pinks, like I was saying. So you get your SpongeBob and Patrick mushrooms sitting on the table at a farmer's market, and it draws everybody in, because who knew mushrooms could glow and look that bright like flowers? Like, people are going to think you dyed them. But yeah, and so pink oysters, they're not. Yeah, lion's mane is almost a little crabby, and I wouldn't say like that pink oysters, or most oysters, I wouldn't even say they're very seafoody. But pink oysters, really, I would say the smell, especially once they start to spoil, it smells like the ocean. Starts to smell a little low tidy. But pink oysters, once you put them in the pan, fry them up with a little bit of butter, salt, and like they taste like ham, like bacon. They're really, really good. They just spoil really fast. And the pink oysters don't yield super hard. The yellow oysters don't yield super hard. The ostreatus, the blues, and things like that are going to be the heaviest yielding oysters, or king oysters. King oysters will yield pretty well, especially if you have your conditions right and the right strain. But yellow oysters, aggressive, really cool, can colonize and grow on almost anything. But yeah, they're debatably invasive. Some people care about that more than others. Some people, it was a hot topic a handful of months ago, and now it starting to die down a little bit. But they're mushrooms. They're breaking down materials. I hate to say that there's I don't know how to word it, but maybe there's worse invasive species. If it is invasive, I'm sure there's worse invasive things we could have than an edible mushroom, breaking down and helping return nutrients quickly to the environment. But again, yes, it's taking the space and role of maybe some other more native fungi that could be growing there. Now, we're going to get into a couple weird ones. So the Pleurotus cystio, wow, Pleurotus cystiosis. You can read it. Before I get too deep, do the colored oysters maintain their color when cooked? If yes, does it depend on cooking style, quick hot sear versus low? And so I haven't cooked all of them in a bunch of different ways, but the pinks, I mean, I usually marinate pretty heavy, but the pinks are gonna go a little bit more gray. The yellows will stay a little bit yellow, but and then like the blues, if you've got a super blue oyster, those will still go a little bit more kind of brown gray. So most of them are gonna lose their color when cooking, but the pinks will maintain it a little bit, especially depending on how early you pull them, and yeah, how hard or how fast you sear them. Hard, fast, hot sear, you're gonna get more of a crisp. You're gonna develop more of a crisp on there. Versus, I'm sure if you do just like a nice slow caramelization type of thing, you can probably maintain color a little bit more. Or maybe if you put it in like a soup or something or a stew, you can maintain that color a little bit more. Honestly, that'd be a great question for red flower fungi. I know he's cooked a bunch of oysters in a bunch of different ways, and he knows all about the colors. So maybe he'll watch this, or I'll ask him, or you can reach out if you haven't followed red flower fungi on Instagram and you want to know more about cooking, tasting, flavors, ferments, native foods to Florida. Red flower fungi is doing a bunch of really cool stuff. So he would definitely know. Other people might maybe have some different experiences. I honestly, I don't cook enough. I cook enough, but I usually also I cover it. I gotta cook with that on my mind now. So I'll get back to you, right? I think it depends. Like most things in mushroom growing, it depends. And they're gonna lose some color, for sure, but it also depends on how early you pull them, how fast and hot you cook them, and kind of what you cook them with. Um, but yeah. So abalone oyster. This thing's weird. I believe I actually had the culture once, and it gets a bunch of these little. I threw it away while moving because I saw a bunch of these little things all over it. These stalks and caps and little doodads on top of the stalk, all over a plate. And it's kind of freaky, especially if you don't know what it is. But it's I guess it just produces those, and they're like asexual spores. And so when you use the agar dish, you can kind of like build. If you have a bunch of those across the agar dish, you can blend that up or add it to a grain spawn, and it is like a really effective colonization because those are the little black dots on top of the oysters are just spores. But then you can fruit it, and it seems it's a little bit lower yielder and some cooler temps, but it still produces some really dense, delicious mushrooms. So I gotta get this culture if anybody has it. I know some people that have it, but if anybody wants to give me this culture, I'm too broke to be buying cultures now, unfortunately. For the time being, I'm on a strict trade basis only. So if you got this culture, let me know. But it's a really cool, and I think this also starts to show some of the diversity in oyster mushrooms. I know we saw some of the color between pink oysters and some of the blue oysters, and then some of the yellow oysters. There's a bunch of different color ranges that the oysters can hold, but they all look the same, and the mushroom itself so it looks the same. King oyster looks different, but then you can see it produces whatever these are. And so this kind of starts to go back to just like how dynamic and adaptive and wide ranging and diverse the Pleurotus genus is, all while producing oyster mushrooms, what essentially we know as oyster mushrooms. And you can tell from afar, like, oh yeah, that looks like an oyster mushrooms. But then it grows mycelium and some with different things that look like this. So it's it's super interesting and weird. But I guess you can find this in the southeastern U.S., in Taiwan, in South Africa, uh, and yeah, it's regular growing until it has these just black droplets of spores all over on these little stalks. So it's really interesting. I guess it also has more of the mycelium in the mushroom smells a little bit more musty than some of the others. But I mean, musty in the right way, it can be good. It's got potential, and for the mycelium to look like that, it's worth it. Next one, another really cool oyster. I've tried to fruit this one a couple times, but it's all been during the summer, and now I'm in Florida. So I think it also wants a higher pH. It wants something with a little bit more calcium in there than some of the other oysters. But the Nebrodini oyster, or Pleurotus nebrodensis, this comes out of, I believe, Sicily. It's a pretty rare variety of oysters. You don't see it around quite as much, but it produces kind of similar to king oysters. Like if you look at the king oyster and you look at this, you can see the similarity, except this isn't all stem. There's still gill that runs down the whole thing. So it's just like a nice, super dense, meaty, like kind of scallop tasting oyster. But again, I don't not too many mushrooms are really that seafoody, especially with a little seasoning and a sear. They usually just end up tasting more umami, but yeah, the Nebrodini oyster, super dense, likes cooler temperatures, slower fruiter, lower yielding than some of the ostreatus and stuff. Still not bad compared to some varieties that I grow, like a tiger sawgill, different genus, but that thing is not a heavy yielder. Um, but the Nebrodini oyster, I believe it wants a little bit higher, more calcium, higher pH, and more calcium in its substrates. But a really cool, different oyster variety. Look into it, find it. I've got a culture from Main Cap and Stem. I believe it's the PN 2670. I had a different culture I got a while ago from Mycotrophic. He sent me his. He sent me one that he got from somewhere, but I don't. I've lost one of them, unfortunately. I've lost so many cultures whenever I moved. It makes me so sad. But you guys, you can't see my face right now, but it's sad. Uh, Aspen oyster. This one I've got. This oyster I've grown it a handful of times. Likes it a little bit cooler, but it can handle some warmer temperatures. I've been able to fruit this up to about 75 degrees, almost 80 degrees. 80 degrees, depends. You need to have some higher humidity. It can't quite take some of the dryness that some of the other, like ostreatus or the Phoenix oyster, can. But that's at least this specific culture. So one of the great things about stems and things with a bunch of mushrooms is those are always a great use to if you can snip those off and snip off some of the stem. They're great to. You can use them, I think, probably in some different like pickling methods as well. Pickling and there's some people that do some pickling and things for some mushrooms, and they come out pretty good. But then and that leaves it with a little extra snap to it, a little extra texture without going full mushy. But I know a lot of people use the stems as they dehydrate the stems, and then we'll blend those up and be able to use those in stocks or in seasonings and things like that. So yeah, some people definitely do some fermentation and some pickling methods. Again, Red Flower Fungi has a bunch of just really good cooking and food and fermentation ideas and concepts that he covers. So he's a great follow on Instagram. I think he's working on some other platforms too, maybe even Patreon. Yeah, for the stems are great to be able to use for seasonings because you can dry those down and then grind them up in like a coffee grinder, use them in seasonings, or you can ferment them and do more of like a pickle. And that stem is going to hold a little more texture than something like a gill, and just like the edge of the cap that's just going to fall apart and be a little too soft in some of the ferments. So Pleurotus populinus. This one I've got is I label it PPOG because Ordway Grove was that special old growth forest I was talking about right at the beginning of the of this live. Just that beautiful grove of old trees, big oaks and pines. I found the wild bear's head and this Aspen oyster there, which is also interesting because by all accounts, it seems I'm still waiting and like I'm open to it being different. But I'm about 99.99% sure it's an Aspen oyster. But it's also funny because Aspen oysters, depending on where you look online, say they're pickier on the substrate than others. And some of them are going to be like they're only growing on aspens, and some say they're growing on on aspens and some beech, and then maybe some cottonwood. It was, but but as you can see here, yes, I mean, red flower fungi, anything fermentation, flavors, koji. He's got a bunch of you can don't bother. I mean, you can bother him, don't, but don't tell him that I said to just ask him every question in the book. But if you can ask him every question in the book in regards to fermentation and cooking and flavors and ferments, like this guy he knows a lot of great things. I love him. Nick, he's a great dude. I met him at MycoFest a couple years ago, and I've stayed in chat. And hopefully we'll be doing a couple different things together coming up soon, and working together because I've got a lot I want to learn from him in regards to flavors and ferments and how things kind of work together. He does a bunch of cool things with mushrooms, fruits, barbecue, koji, you name it. He's great. Real nice guy. So red flower fungi. So yeah, so a lot of people will say these things are only going to grow on beech, cottonwood, or specifically only aspen. But if you look at the bark on this tree, this thing was growing on old oak. I don't remember what type of oak, but it was different. It's grown fine on me on different barbecue pellets, whether they're mixed barbecue pellets or just oak pellets. It's done really well. It's a little weird on agar. It doesn't come in quite as thick as some of the other oyster varieties, but then as soon as it hits grain and everything, it's fine. And it's you can see it yields pretty well. That was in my tent while I was a couple of years ago, so I was able to keep a little cooler conditions, higher humidity, and it gets a really nice like ivory look on it. And like I was saying, it's got like really nice, fragrant, that sweet, almost a little black licorice, but flowery and like light and sweet and oystery. And the mycelium in the fruit, it smells so good. I love it. So I'm gonna try and get this one going. I don't think it's gonna like the heat, but at least come winter down here in Florida, I'll be able to have this one outside, I think, and collect some spores. I think so. I remember actually reading something in whenever I was doing some oyster review for this, looking through the Gourmet Medicinal Mushrooms by Paul Stamets, the Mushroom Bible, and he had pointed out something about I believe it was the eucalyptus. Obviously, I think it depends. Look into it maybe a little bit more. But he was saying too that for a while people avoided eating mushrooms on eucalyptus because there was a couple reports of people getting sick, but then they looked further into it or ate more or like whatever. There was more data, and then it turned out that it was nothing, and so now it doesn't seem to be an issue. And you can eat off eucalyptus, but maybe that's just oysters. And maybe chicken of the woods doesn't pull or pulls all the bad stuff and concentrates it. So I would look that up specifically on the chicken of the woods. But I think in the growing gourmet medicinal mushrooms, Paul Stamets talks about there was a thought that eucalyptus, growing the mushrooms and eating mushrooms off of eucalyptus was making a couple people sick. But then it turns out, I guess it wasn't. Which even if they think it possibly happened, maybe it just depends. Maybe not everybody can handle it. Like even chicken of the woods, I know not everybody can eat chicken of the woods or freckled chestnuts. Some species more people are kind of picky about and can't eat or kind of allergic to. And so I'd imagine it also kind of with the substrates, especially with more compound filled substrates like eucalyptus or different pines and things like that. I imagine some of those can create some different concentrations in some of the fruit bodies that maybe particular people can't handle. But specifically for chicken of the woods on eucalyptus, I would double check, but I think it's fine. But you never know. Mushrooms are crazy and accumulate all sorts of crazy things. Speaking of crazy things, you see this thing? This isn't. Somehow I couldn't find a good picture. I swear, until I was putting this presentation together, I've been able to find pictures of this. But look up the king tuber oyster. It's you can see it in the bottom picture. It's got a little chunk at the base of it, but it's a sclerotia producing oyster mushroom. I mean, it'll grow some pretty big ass sclerotia, like size of somebody's hand, and you can cultivate it. People are growing them. They also trap nematodes and I think produce the nematodal compounds, not just traps them. And so that's like the ostreatus variety. But it's native to Australia, Asia, Africa area, and you can see it's just a totally different morphology than all the other oysters. But you can see the big gills, which kind of makes it fit in with some of the other oysters. But it's kind of more of a cap and stem type mushroom almost that comes off of a sclerotia in really warm tropical type conditions. Doesn't yield that high. It's a little slower. But I mean, look at it. I don't know if I wrote anything down. I keep forgetting to check my notes. So if I finish this and I realize I forgot to mention all the cool facts I wrote down, I'll be so disappointed. That's all right. We'll make plenty more videos to talk about all of this. Plenty more times. Yeah, I didn't write anything down about that one. Really? I just thought I was gonna remember it all. Shit. Oh no. Yeah, it can take up to like 95 degrees. In the Paul Stamets, in his book, 86 to 95 degrees. So that means that this thing can actually probably grow to like 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So I don't know what 110 degrees Fahrenheit Celsius is, and I don't know if it would actually do it. But if Paul Stamets says this can grow to 95 degrees, whew, this bad boy might be able to handle like 110. That's crazy. But yeah, can also grow on wheat straw. So that's pretty cool. While being a weird, slower, different oyster that produces sclerotia and traps nematodes and can grow up to 95 degrees, it's also capable of growing on wheat straw. So I gotta get this culture. This is another one, just like the abalone oyster. If you got this, I know a couple of people that have it. I might have to, if you don't see this, the 3 people that I know that have this, that I know probably won't end up watching this far into this video. But if you are, holla at your boy, because it's hot down here, and I'm trying to grow some king tuber oysters. Don't make me hit you up, because I will. But yeah, so that they're crazy. I don't know. I gotta go on. This could be a video on its own. This could be a video on its own. This could be a video on its own. That could be a video on. So we'll keep going. We're not gonna cover everything on all of these oysters. I just gotta kind of present them. I don't know. I heard that it's not recommended to drink alcohol prior, during, or after consuming chicken of the woods. Honestly, I've eaten chicken of the woods a bunch, but I don't drink at all, ever. I have a glass of wine when I make like a shrimp scampi or a chicken scampi. I'll have a glass of wine or 3 sips of wine when I make that. So yeah, I don't really drink, so I'm not sure. Maybe somebody else knows. I know like the inky cat mushroom or some of the inky cat mushrooms you can't drink at all or else it'll like really mess you up. But yeah, similar to those. Yeah, I'm not sure. But I know, yeah, chicken of the woods, there's a couple different compounds and things that it seems that some people can't really consume those. I would imagine, yeah, some of that issue maybe is coming from people drinking, having alcohol in their system, maybe before, during, or after. And that's possibly some of the reasons why some people don't agree with chicken of the woods, or chicken of the woods doesn't agree with some people. And then there's also the 2 different species of chicken of the woods. So maybe it depends, right? Maybe it depends one of them isn't recommended while drinking, or maybe one of them is better off of the eucalyptus. So that's where mushrooms continue to be fun and interesting and just never-ending rabbit holes that we can dive into. Tarragon oyster, Pleurotus usmos. This is like the first one, the first Latin name I had not heard of. This one, tuber regium, I didn't say that. But this one, I was like, I looked this up a couple places, and like 3 different websites honestly had it spelled slightly different. So I went off of the iNaturalist and things I trust. So look wise, grow wise, structure, performance things, it seems pretty closely related to ostreatus, except it smells pretty strongly of tarragon. I know Renegade's Mushrooms has a video on this on YouTube that I had watched actually in preparation for this specific tarragon oyster slide. And he had his wife do a side-by-side test, and she said neither of them actually had the taste. So maybe it doesn't taste like it, but at least I guess smells strongly of tarragon. More of a England, Scotland origin. So it's kind of like things a little bit cooler than maybe some of these other like Phoenix oyster and pink oyster. But it can still handle some warmth, probably up to about 80 degrees. Probably once it hits 80, you're probably going to hit a little bit of inconsistencies and a slightly lower yield on this one. But I'd say that it could definitely still be able to handle it, especially with a little bit of time and adaptation and or the right cultivar. So that's one thing. It depends. Cultivation conditions, temperatures, and things, especially with mushrooms, with how fast mushrooms are able to grow, fruit, adapt, and just kind of go from generation to generation to generation. People have, and the cultivator can have quite a heavy hand in how the mushrooms perform. Like if I have my mushrooms constantly on super heavy supplementation, super sweet, simple sugar agar, and just like a real simple one substrate, and I'm just running the same mycelium, I'm going to start to lose some ability to produce some different enzymes, and some of my kind of adaptations, maybe to some different temperature swings, versus a culture that maybe the guy kind of stresses out or puts through some different nutrient regiments and some different schedules and things, so that way the cultures kind of stays on its toes. I'm not saying like mistreat your cultures, but if you make things too easy and the culture doesn't have to try and survive because it's just getting pumped full of sugar and things, then it's not going to want to do it. So I'm hoping that by having a bunch of cultures outside in Florida, right, I'm going to start working towards some of these cultures, like my Aspen oyster that doesn't really love the heat. Maybe after a couple generations in some warmer conditions, maybe I'll lose a little bit of the fragrance, a little bit of the something that makes it quite as wild. But maybe then that takes a couple steps closer to some warmer conditions. So like all of these temperature ranges for every single culture, there's some like the pinks and the golds and things that definitely handle the warmer temperatures. But a lot of them are, and like the Kings and Nebardini want it colder. But there's a lot of it depends. Just like all mushroom growings, I'll say 12,000 times. It depends. So yeah, that was like what, 8 oysters? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 oyster mushrooms, and there's 203. And I didn't even go into like really that many of them. Like, oysters are deep. So wherever in the world you are, whatever your substrates that you can come up with, whatever waste materials are in your local environment, there's probably an oyster mushroom fit for your exact environment that can work easily with your waste materials and produce heavy yields. It's one of the reasons why I think oysters are so fascinating. It's because there's so many of them. And even just in the ostreatus genus, there's so much variability and possibility, just for different substrates, for different temperature ranges, for different speeds, for different looking, different tasting, different smelling, different acting mushrooms. Like, it's one single genus, one single species, even with the ostreatus, and there's still so much range and so much potential for us to be able to work with and grow off of. So that's why I love the oysters. They're adaptable, right? No matter where in the world you look, there's an oyster mushroom cut out for you. So mostly in cultivation, we're gonna see probably more ostreatus, more of the blue oysters, and things like that, and maybe even some of the phoenix oysters. Those are probably the most notorious everywhere. After that, I'd probably say pinks and yellows, but it may be kings as well. Kings could be in there depending on where in the world you're at. But the ostreatus and pulmonarius species can consume anything from sugarcane waste to coffee grounds to wheat straw to hardwoods, some softwoods, some pines. Especially if you train them a little bit, they can eat anything, any temperature ranges. There's a variety for it, so they're just so adaptable. Uh, so like it's not as easy as just grow Pleurotus ostreatus, unfortunately, because if you get deeper into it, you'll realize that the blue oyster and the Pleurotus ostreatus from Joe Schmo in Tennessee versus Jim Schmeckel in Kansas versus, I'm running out of names, Jane Doe in Maine, right? Like they're all gonna have these slightly different conditions and these slightly different species, and whichever one fits and works with something in your range is where you need to look and find those different varieties. They're not, because unfortunately they're not all equal. So how you train on pine? Some species are just going to be able to handle it and produce some enzymes, and some pines better than others. But I know like the Phoenix oyster is able to handle a little bit more pine, and really like training for anything is even cigarette butts and things like that, is you kind of just have to introduce the substrate slowly, introduce it early on, so you can even do a little bits, probably introduce some pine pellets and things like that early in the substrate, so like in the agar and things like that. Especially you could do some different spore germinations and things like that, to find different spores or different colonies that are going to be able to handle the pine pellets, the pine agar. Even that's how you can do with like cigarette agar or denim agar, whatever your final substrate is. You can use that and some early mycelial growth to help develop those enzyme pathways, and also figure out what the potential is, some of the concentrations and things like that. We can do a whole thing on training and stuff like that, and it depends. Like some pines, some really fresh pines, and some oyster mushrooms just aren't going to be able to break it down because of those different compounds and like fungicides that the pines are producing. But it's still, that's something that it depends on the species, depends on the exact source of pine. But there are a lot of people that are able to grow and utilize some pine. I know that, I believe it's the cactus hat. I don't know exactly the pine, but I know that cactus hat mushrooms, I believe it was. He might still be operating. I'm not sure if he is. But he was down here in Florida. And I know Cactus Hat was running on, I think, quite a bit of pine pellets. I'm not sure what his supplementation or anything to go with it was. But I think actually Mossy Creek has a video on YouTube touring the Cactus Hat facility, so he might go into it there. And it's possible I'm making it up and it's not Cactus Hat mushrooms, but usually I'm pretty good. And I somehow remember a lot of people doing a lot of different things in the mushroom realm because I spent too much time on forums and videos. But there's a lot of people. There's a few other people I know out west in the U.S. That are growing on pine as well, or maybe more in the Midwest. But yeah, there's a few different people that are able to grow on pine. Pulmonarius is one of the great varieties for that. And I think some specific lion's manes can take it, or Hericiums can take it a little bit better. And then like the gold wine cap, I believe, can handle pine versus like the regular wine cap doesn't do quite as well on pine. I might be making that last one up. But productivity, oysters. Why are they so awesome? Because they turn nothing into pounds of food very fast. In the case of Florida oysters, some Phoenix oysters, some gold oysters, and the pink oysters, like we're talking like 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks from adding the grain spawn to a substrate, you're able to have and produce and eat fruits, eat the mushrooms. So like they're fast, they're productive, and they're adaptable, right? They're able to be on a bunch of different substrates and still be one of the top producers, especially ostreatus just as itself, but even any of the mushrooms worldwide that are cultivated, whether it be lion's manes, reishi, chestnuts, enoki, shiitake, you name it. Oysters are always going to be at the top of the cultivation. Oftentimes it's ostreatus. Those are going to be the heaviest cultivated ones, and it's because their biological efficiency, their speed, like they're able to turn little into a lot of food very easily. And it's also why that makes it such an interesting crop, I think, for a lot of small farmers and a lot of people with not a lot of space to just be able to produce their own healthy food, is because they're able to work so fast. And in your closet, you can produce pounds of food, especially off of oyster mushrooms, with just a couple weeks turnaround. Basically, the same week you start, 2 weeks after you start it, week after you give it fresh air. If you buy fully colonized oyster blocks, you can cut a hole in the block, and later that weekend, you do it on a Monday, you might be eating oyster mushrooms on Saturday. And so there's not, or selling them on Saturday, right? And so there's not really that many other crops, plants, fungus, even anything that you can, any crop that you can get that quick of turnaround time for something also as productive, right? It's not like even like hemp. Hemp is great. It grows super fast, super productively. So much biomass so fast, but like there's only so much you can do with it, and you got to turn it into other things. It's great, but like oysters are similar. They produce so much biomass so fast, but then it's all delicious and it's all just umami bombs, and they're all, depending on the variety, they all have slightly different textures and flavors and tastes, and just there's so much to oyster mushrooms. And like they're substrates, right? So they're productive and they're adaptable, and they can grow on damn near anything. Like look it up. They're on sugarcane waste, coffee grounds, books, toilets, corn cobs, paper waste. I think I said jeans, but they're on, like, people grow oyster mushrooms on denim jeans. What does that even mean? They don't care. They just grow. Mostly they're using it for the water, and you're adding the grain spawn, so they're spreading off the grain spawn, but they're able to take a higher carbon to nitrogen ratio. They don't need quite as much nitrogen as some other different species. And they kind of like more cellulose than lignin. And it's why they're able to also work so well on straw because of that. That's the cellulose level in straw. They're able to just to break that down and rip through it. And like I was saying earlier at the very, very beginning, they're saprophytic. So they eat dead plant material. But you will see oysters fruiting in the wild off of still kind of partially living trees that's not fully dead, because as soon as that tree starts to go, they're going to try and take over and be a little parasitic, just waiting for their chance. So when it comes to substrates, it's almost anything, right? If you can get it sterile into field capacity, it's from living material, right? It's got some carbon in there. You can hydrate it a little bit. You can grow oyster mushrooms off of it. Sometimes sometimes you can get away without pasteurization, but a lot of times you'll have to at least pasteurize it. But really, there's people putting some really impressive flushes off of a substrate just made of soaked Amazon boxes. And maybe you add a little bit of a coffee ground tea or something, or some sprinkled coffee grounds in there to give it a little bit of nitrogen. And then you're able to produce pounds of oyster mushrooms. Not as consistently as a 20% sterilized hardwood substrate block, but still, you can grow oyster mushrooms off of just about anything. Um, and like I've talked about a little bit, some bioremediation work, and some soil work. So they are kind of related, kind of different. And some of them, there's some people that you bring up some of the oyster mushroom bioremediation and Paul Stamets work, and a little bit of it is, yeah, it's a lot of it is his own research, his own studies, and he backs his research and some of his studies up with his own studies, which sometimes, given how he handles his business now and some of the mycelium issues, you wonder how legit some of these claims are. But with the oysters, they're great at producing a bunch of enzymes, great at breaking down lignin. And lignin and cellulose are very complicated, long chain compounds. And those often closely resemble a lot of industrial contaminants, things like different oils and things. So that's also possible on how, while maybe Paul Stamets is a great storyteller, and maybe, toots his horn and inflates it a little bit, there is still definitely a lot of potential for oyster mushrooms in bioremediation, breaking down some different industrial pollutants, maybe growing off of different oils, or at least breaking down, simplifying the oils and some different compounds to things a little bit safer and less harmful for the environment. And then, yeah, they can trap some nematodes with their living and dead mycelium. Some species, some varieties better at it than others. And yeah, obviously sometimes maybe some nematodes specifically, it doesn't matter. But there's a bunch of science on that, and some research on those, and some of the compounds they're able to produce, that you can then use as like a spent mushroom substrate. You take those blocks after they're fruited, soak them in some teas, and you're able to kind of produce and collect some of those different enzymes and compounds, and spread those into your garden, or just spread the spent mushroom substrate itself. Nutrition. I'm not a nutritionist, so I'm not going to go super crazy on this. I need to understand it and get into it a little bit more so I can tell people more things that, care about it more, and this and that for their nutrition. I don't track things like crazy. I don't really look up how much protein certain things have. I just eat things that make me feel good and think about what's in them, and I just don't go that deep. But when you look at nutrition of oyster mushrooms, you'll see that compared to most mushrooms, they've got a pretty high protein content. Once they're dry, about 20-30% protein, high amount of beta glucans, fiber, niacin, B vitamins. So they're really nutritious and have a bunch of different things that are going to help your body just kind of progress, do its thing, handle stress. It's got a bunch of different compounds that we're not going to go super deep into. Things like pleurin, which exclusive to Pleurotus. There's some different studies on that being able to help with some stress. Also, that being able to help with some lung health and things as well, which is interesting because of spore lung. There's a few different things for pleurin that it's capable of. And then there's also ergothioneine, which is like an antioxidant, I believe more than just an antioxidant. It's got some different kind of neurological type potentials, but it's a great stress antioxidant thing to have in your body to help handle stress. It also produces ergosterol, which is like a mushroom fungus cholesterol type thing, and lovastatin. But the oyster mushrooms, they're great for helping just kind of control the high cholesterol and things in your body, get some things moving. The great high in vitamins, high in beta glucans and fiber, so just kind of keep your body itself moving and grooving. Things internally, good for gut health. It's really strong, good for calcium. The extracts themselves are great for with calcium. And some other compounds that are then also going to help things with different hormones and aging. So aging older women do great with oyster extracts and a bunch of oyster mushrooms because it helps keep with the calcium and some other compounds within, helps kind of keep their bones strong, and helps help them be able to actually keep keep producing the things to keep their bones strong and their bodies going. Oyster mushrooms, they also contain all the essential amino acids, but they're also not quite. I'm not going to act like they're the full meat substitute, right? I love oyster mushrooms, and I probably will go vegetarian in plenty of stints in my life, but they're not meat. They're not quite as dense as eggs or different legumes or different meats themselves. They're great in conjunction with, like, in addition to your steak or your this or that or eggs, like being able to top them with and have some oyster mushrooms. You're able to really pull the nutritional value of that entire dish up with a bunch of the different compounds and things that the oyster mushrooms are able to provide. But protein wise, amino acid wise, they're just not quite as dense as some of these other things, which is fine. They don't need to be. But I know some people do like to use oyster mushrooms and other mushrooms just as that one-to-one meat substitute. And while they're going to provide a bunch of different helpful compounds that meats don't have, like pleurin, ergothioneine, ergosterol, lovastatin, all the ones in all the other mushrooms, like there's a bunch of things these other meats and things aren't going to provide. And so mushrooms aren't really a one-to-one conversion replacement for meat. But they're really, really great in addition to kind of help unlock and promote and elevate all the nutrition within some of these different meats and steaks and burgers and dishes. Just use mushrooms, and yeah, it's better than not having that. You're able to get way more protein than if you don't have any mushrooms in there. Same with like the mushroom and bean combination. You can definitely pick that up and get some good higher levels of protein and amino acids and different compounds and minerals that your body's going to need versus just eating legumes. But more than anything, I eat oyster mushrooms because they're delicious. Depending on the variety, there's different textures and flavors, so you can change it up. You can kind of find what works for you. If you grow blue oysters in cold conditions with really high fresh air, you're going to get really dense, really short, meaty, delicious mushrooms. If you grow those same culture in hotter conditions with little fresh air, you're going to get thin, stemmy mushrooms. They're going to be a little bit tough. So depending on which variety you're growing, you can also kind of manipulate the grow conditions to kind of create the mushroom flavor, texture, size that you're looking for the method you're looking for. So that's one of my favorite things about the oyster mushrooms is they're just delicious. They're really easy to cook. Honestly, chocolate oysters, they're an ostreatus variety. I have a picture of them somewhere right here on the right. Chocolate oyster, P.O. Cho chocolate oyster. It's an ostreatus variety. It can handle probably like 85, almost 90 degrees compared to the blue oyster. That's a little bit lower than that. That thing, whew, that chocolate oyster might be the best tasting oyster I've got. Something about it's got like a little nuttiness, a little meatier. The stems aren't as snappy. They've got just like a nicer texture throughout. Chocolate oyster is great. I love that one. So yeah, oysters are just delicious, right? They're really good for you, and they can grow in any conditions. They can grow on anything, but they're also just delicious. So more than anything, eat oysters, eat mushrooms, take your mushrooms. Lots of spores. We covered this earlier. Wear a mask. If you have like 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 oyster blocks, whatever, maybe don't have them right next to your bed, sporulating on your head all night while you're sleeping. But it's not a huge issue if you don't have that many going. But if you have a grow tent at your house, if you have a bunch of things going, open up a window and ventilate your oyster mushrooms, especially if you have a handful of oyster mushroom blocks always going. You want to ventilate those. Yeah, sometimes you might feel like it's a little overkill, but I promise it's way better to have healthy lungs and not a bunch of spores in your lungs. Then it'll ruin it, and you won't be able to go around oyster mushrooms or other mushrooms. You'll also just have unhealthy lungs. You'll be struggling and have asthma-like conditions. Some people have it worse than others, but it's terrible. Don't do it. Like if you look on the top, this photo is just that all that white on the table is just spores coming off of a block. And then the picture on the bottom, you've probably seen this. If you run the humidity high enough and like the the conditions right, you'll be able to see it's like, I don't know if they like also kind of start to germinate, but the spores will just like hang like little icicles off of the gills. As I get, there's so many spores, so many. So unless you want a future full of allergic reactions and asthma-like conditions and bad lungs, wear a respirator or have a bunch of fresh air. Ventilate your spores in your oyster mushrooms, especially if you're growing more than just a couple blocks. It's worth it. It's not overkill. They also love fresh air, so the more you can ventilate your oysters and get the spores out of there, that's probably more fresh air that's coming in, and the oysters need fresh air. So ventilate those things, get rid of the spores, stay safe. What did I miss? Probably everything, right? I don't know. There's a lot about oyster mushrooms. I didn't go nearly that much into substrates. I'll post a comment, my just classic substrate. I do like to sterilize this one, but I've been able to get away as long as I use it fast, and it's usually a 5-pound block. If I spawn up to like a half pound of oyster spawn, I've had pretty good luck with this. But again, it's at about like the 20% range or so. It's getting to that higher range with some of the wheat brands. So depending on how long it sits, you might want to sterilize it versus pasteurize it. But 5 cups wheat bran, or no, not 5 cups wheat bran. I'm talking out loud. Don't listen to me. 5 cups hardwood fuel pellets, 1.25 cups wheat bran, and then usually 6 cups / 1.4 liters. It's like the 1.4 liter mark is about 6 cups, but I have a 1.4 liter mark on the pitcher. Depending on your substrate, the blocks or the wood pellets, the hydration will vary a little bit, but that's in the comment there. 5 cups hardwood fuel pellets, 1.25 cups wheat bran. For some reason, no spaces, even though I pressed enter and it was supposed to be like 3 different lines. 5 cups hardwood fuel pellets, 1.25 cups wheat bran, 6 cups of water. I'll pressure cook that. Oftentimes I will sterilize that, but I've been able to get away with oyster mushrooms in about a half pound of grain spawn in that as well. But ideally, sterilizing your substrate's nice because then you can just sit on it. You don't have to use it immediately. It's a little less worry, but that's my favorite sterilized, easy to use substrate. I will have some more trials and stuff coming up. I want to post some more videos for the lives. Some of the lives, it's hard to do some demonstrations because I've found that the video doesn't come in very clear. The presentation itself does, but sometimes the video itself, I tried to do a lab demonstration a few weeks ago and it didn't really come in quite as clear as I wanted it. You couldn't really see that much, given the fact that I have a nice camera. You couldn't really see that well. It was poorer quality than this laptop camera I'm using, which is a pretty old laptop. And so I was just, I think, trying to do too much on the Wi-Fi while it's live. I'm not sure. But I'll probably do some more formatted, regular videos on YouTube. So if you haven't yet, subscribe, hit the little bell thing so then you get a notification when I post videos. And pretty soon I'll have some videos where I run some different oyster mushrooms on some different substrates. I want to run them on some different cardboard, on some different straw and different things, just to have my own materials. I've done it before in the past, but I haven't really taken pictures and videos of it. So if I didn't take pictures and videos of it, did I really do it? Yes, but as somebody trying to show people how to do things, no. So I have to do a bunch of things again so I can get good content of it and be able to post that. So stay tuned, and I'll be doing way more on some of the different supplements and substrates and ways to grow and use oysters and other fungus and other mushrooms in some more pre-formatted videos coming up. But if there's anything about oyster mushrooms specifically you want to know, you need to know, you're looking for the details on species, grow conditions, sporulation, breeding, whatever. If it's not even about oyster mushrooms, but it's about mushrooms, let me know. Ask me in the questions, in the chat, in the comments. Message me directly. Sometimes it takes me a day or 2 or 3 to get back to some messages, but it is just me. So I will get back eventually. And I'm an open book. I try and share everything I possibly know. And so I will probably, when I do respond, I'll send probably way too long of a message and over explain everything, but it's the only way I know how to do it. So yeah, let me know. Let me know what I missed. Reach out. Let me know your questions about oysters. Let me know your questions about the different varieties, whether it's the pinks, the yellows, the golds, yellow/golds, the blues, the snows, the pearls, the chocolates, whatever. Oysters are vast. There's a lot to them, but also they're pretty resilient and adaptive, and they're one of the great beginner mushrooms because of their ability to overcome your shortcomings and still just kind of fruit anyways. Lion's mane can be a little bit trickier and kind of show some flaws, but oysters, for the most part, they just want to do their thing. You can put them outside like this picture. Those are some of those blue oyster blocks where I was saying I had blue oysters in my tent and there was like too much things going on. My CO2 was too high. Everything else was fruiting, and I couldn't figure out my oysters weren't fruiting. So I put them outside, and then boom, they fruited. They got their fresh air, and it's because the blue oysters do. They do have those limits where if it's too high CO2, the blue oysters are just, I'm not doing it. I don't want to. And then I put them outside and they boom. So blue oysters a little finicky, but for the most part, blue oysters, phoenix oysters, pink oysters, yellow oysters, all these oysters, they're going to grow on whatever you put in front of them. They're great in the garden. They're great indoor. They're great producers, medicinally, nutritionally. Garden wise, bioremediation wise, there's really a lot of potential with these. So I know I didn't cover enough, but let's look. I just put a couple pictures, nothing crazy, but there's a chocolate oyster right there on the right. So that's probably my favorite oyster to eat. It's just got like that little bit of nuttiness, but like really tender, chewy. The stems don't like it. You can see it's like a little stemmy. It was coming out, reaching out pretty good. But those stems didn't have any snappy texture, chewy texture. They were really good, meaty, tender mushrooms. I was super impressed. On the left, that's a phoenix oyster just starting to fruit, just sitting out in the yard under a little tree. So it gets like an hour or two of shade in the late day, but just hanging out. Spent mushroom block. Right under it was a Florida oyster block, and that actually ended up fruiting like the next day. And then here, this is actually 2 Pleurotus ostreatus varieties. So I've talked about both of these a handful of times. So the left is my blue oyster culture, the POCNS. And then on the right is also an ostreatus, and it's the Florida oyster, the POFL. And so you can see a little bit of the difference. Similar conditions. The one on the right, the Florida oyster, is a little bit warmer by about probably 10 degrees. The blue oyster can't quite handle the mid-90s, the 95 range quite as well, or even the 90s quite as well as the Florida oyster can. But you can see there the difference in the amount of pins, the cap size, the shape, the colors, the texture, the density. The Florida oyster is a little thinner, but actually this right here, Florida oyster on the right, and the POCNS, the blue oyster on the left, is going to be my first oyster breeding project. I didn't put these 2 pictures here actually for that reason, but as I'm sitting here looking at them, I've got a few of those spores collected and germinating on some agar, as well as a phoenix oyster because I want to run that multi-spore. But these 2 right here will actually be my first oyster breeding project, where I'm trying to get a little bit of that denseness from the blue oyster, especially when you can grow it in colder conditions. They get really meaty. The POCNS is a great culture, but when it's warm and hot, it can get a little blotchy and not as productive. And that's where the Florida oyster shines, is any temperature. So I'm hoping that by being able to separate single spores from each of these, a handful of each, hopefully, I'll be able to then combine them and create a better, more resilient Florida oyster, because I'm down here in Florida. I'll have to come up with some creative names for sure. But yeah, so this actually will be hopefully my first oyster variety. I get the breeding is was those two crossed together. So thank you, Thomas. You had great questions. I appreciate you being here, man. Appreciate the support. So thank you guys. Keep growing, keep learning. More than anything, don't be afraid to just keep failing forward, and just share those experiences with other people. The more you fail and share them with other people, you're going to help them kind of succeed and take those steps a little bit faster than you did. And just keep remembering that every time that you do fail, there's a lesson there. If things are going wrong, slow down, take a step back, ask some questions, reach out to me or some other people in your community, and we'll figure it out. But sometimes you got to fail. That way you know what not to do. So don't be afraid of it. Just embrace it and know that you're maybe a little bit closer to doing things the right way. So with that being said, we are about a 2-hour mark, so that was pretty good. I covered a little bit about all the oysters, but not nearly in depth enough on each, so more to come. Next week, we are going to be talking more about just cloning wild genetics, and maybe why you should be cloning some wild mushrooms in your areas. And yeah, some of the importance on that. So that'll be next week. So stay tuned on that. I think I've got it posted. Like, subscribe, sign up for the little bell thing. So when I get my next live going, you'll see that. When I post some more scheduled, more formatted videos showing off some different processes, be sure you hit the notifications so that way you know when those come out. And then I'll remove myself. Anything at all, if you want to find something related to me, go to swampfoxfungi.com. I've got links that go to all my socials, my email, my Patreon, my Discord link, whatever it may be. If it involves me, I've also got a bunch of cool cultures for sale. Feel free to buy any of those to help support me and my work, or go on Patreon and sign up for whatever tier. I even have free tiers on the Patreon. I'm trying to put some good free information out there, as well as some more content, some more ideas, some more information, some more deeper dives for those that sign up at a different higher tier. So if you made it this far, consider joining, supporting the swamp however you can. But if you've made it this far, you're already supporting me. So I appreciate you. That's it for today. Thank you guys. I'm Swamp Fox. This was a live babble on oyster mushrooms. I'm pretty parched. I finished my water early. I never bring enough in here. But thank you for listening to me talk about mushrooms. We'll be back next week. Stay swampy. Wait, there it is.